In this current day and age, we live under constant threat of the climate crisis. This is an issue that threatens all individuals from all nations, especially developing countries situated near coastlines and the equator. As time goes by, the situation becomes increasingly desperate, and more extreme regulations are needed to combat this issue. The most important thing, though, we need to make sure that all parties are responsible. That is to say that companies, organizations, and individuals have to take part in this fight. That is why we must take a stance to criminalize all parties that won't recycle. If Proposition wants to win this debate, we have to prove why criminalizing individuals and organizations who don't recycle is a necessary regulation, and prove how it's justified. What is our model? A. We're going to make a government body that will supervise this law. B. Recycle demands for individuals and corporations or organizations would be different. For individuals, all recyclables that they buy would have to be supervised by the government, and they would face a penalty if they decide to burn or throw the recyclable material into the trash. At the very least, they should give their recyclables to other individuals and organizations that would recycle these materials for them. In the case of companies, governments would strictly regulate the materials that these companies may use in their products where applicable. They would have to recycle materials that they use up while processing the product. What does this look like? Bottled water companies reusing the plastic that they find to create their water bottles, or construction companies using recycled plastic bricks to build infrastructure. Now onto my arguments. First, it is principally and practically urgent to criminalize non-recycling individuals and organizations. In the modern industrialized era, the world has seen immense growth thanks to the excessive exploitation of natural resources and polluting through the use of artificial materials such as plastics. And this has created a population that is used to wasteful practices that are harmful to the environment. What does this look like? 1. Companies who refuse to make recyclable goods because they cost much higher to produce. And 2. Individuals who refuse to recycle because it is inconvenience to them. Why is the status quo not enough to combat this issue? Regulations aren't enough. Governments all around the world have taken it upon themselves to try and reduce their own carbon emissions through incentivizing individuals to use green energy or promoting the consumption of environmentally friendly products. But the reality is, things like green energy and environmentally friendly products aren't cost effective enough for people to use them. Take the situation in America, for example. They've stopped drilling for oil on federal soil, causing the gas prices to increase, and then telling people to buy electric cars because they're far more environmentally friendly. Electric cars are far too expensive for most individuals to afford, even with the cost of running traditional cars exponentially rising. Most people simply can't afford to buy more environmentally friendly products. The only option that these individuals would have to protect the environment is to recycle. In this era where the threat of climate change is imminent, people have a moral obligation to recycle. Recycling is something that all individuals can do, and is by far the most economically viable option rather than spending exorbitant amounts of money on the underdeveloped technology that is green energy. The only real regulation then that the government can put into place without destroying the lives of its citizens is to criminalize the individuals who actively choose not to recycle. When you put this law into place, it normalizes the recycling of materials for people who would otherwise be lazy to do so. That way, this regulation is justified because it creates a society where people are more mindful of what they buy and are far less wasteful of products that destroy the environment when thrown away. Why companies need to be regulated? The problem doesn't only stem from individuals. It also comes from large corporations who are the top producers of materials like plastics or dangerous chemicals. These companies do have the resources to recycle the products that they produce, but for them it becomes an expensive endeavor and usually isn't worth it for them to recycle these products. The only way to incentivize them is to criminalize non-recycling companies who have the opportunity to recycle. This drastically lowers the amount of harmful materials that these companies produce. Why? Because there is already so much waste and reusable material in the environment that it is these companies' responsibility then to stop producing new materials when there is already so much of it in the natural environment. What is the conclusion then? Forcing people to recycle is the most effective and least intrusive way that governments can regulate the carbon footprint of their nations. A second argument, why the government should categorize this as a crime. Let's look at the context first. There are usually two conditions that the government checks to see if a person or organization is criminal. 1, they're negligent. This is why we penalize drunk driving, or if you run into a stop sign and crash into a building. People know that it's dangerous, but they still do it anyway. 2, they're causing active harm to other individuals. This is what most crimes do. crimes that hurt others, for example, trigger warning assault or defamation. We will be giving analysis on why sometimes the harms of not recycling can be worse than even murder. First point of analysis, individuals are negligent. We think that usually individuals don't recycle, not because they can't, but rather because they're negligent. Why is this the case? Two things to say. One, recycling is now easy and accessible. We don't think that it's actually that hard to switch out your plastic bag for a tote bag, for example. They share the exact same purpose. Two, education on the climate is highly prevalent. It's on social media, on posters, on the news, especially when major events like COP26 happen. Even governments have regular programs to educate individuals on this. This means then that individuals who don't recycle are often actively destroying the environment, not because they don't know that they're hurting the environment, but simply because they think that recycling is an inconvenience for them. Second point of analysis, companies don't care. Profit-driven companies are often ignored when recycling is brought up into the conversation, but they shouldn't be exempt either. These companies are the ones who produce these harmful materials such as plastics in the first place. We don't think that they are incapable of recycling because one, these companies have vast amounts of resources, so they can't be excused because they quote-unquote can't afford it. Two, these companies allocate much of their funding into synthesizing more plastics and other materials to use in their products, rather than recycling these materials that are not only abundant, but also destroying the natural environment. That is to say that corporations need to be held responsible for all the waste materials that they produce. They have the ability and money to recycle, they just don't want to because it's more expensive. Third point of analysis, it hurts other people. Everyone knows this. Climate change is an issue that will affect millions, if not billions of people around the globe, many of them below the poverty line. Opposition might say that yes, climate change is bad, but there are people who are recycling who aren't intending harm upon those who will be affected by climate change. But no matter what the intent is, they're still actively endangering lives by choosing not to recycle the products that they consume when the consequences of not doing so are clearly damaging on a global scale. What is the conclusion then? We think that individuals and corporations need to be held accountable for the waste that they produce to spare the lives of the people around the globe affected by climate change. For all those reasons, it's only logical to propose.